want to talk about improving your video shots. When I started taking video, I'd been a photographer for probably 10-12 years. The first camera that I had that could shoot video was I think it was a Nikon D90, and it could do little 30-second videos at a time. It's been around for a while, and you could do little 30-second videos with it initially, and then it became 5 minutes and then 20, and now you can shoot up to 29 minutes and 59 seconds on this camera. So when I first started, I was already taking videos essentially as a photographer, and I was staying very static. I was really staying quite still, and what I realized is just a few things that you can do that will really rapidly improve the look and the cinematic feel of your video shots, that will just make things feel a little bit more epic. So the first thing is just move. It sounds really silly, but move around the subject, walk around the subject gently. Try not to do any big heavy footsteps. If you've got a stabilizer, so if you've got a Steadicam type device or a gimbal or anything like that, it will help you move more fluidly. But to be honest, you can walk gently. There's a whole lot of stuff out there. If you watch, there's a video on the ninja walk, which I've seen Matti Hapoya talk about, where you just step very gently to create smooth movement. So move around the subject to be able to get more angles, and particularly if you can keep that subject in focus as you move around the subject, it just helps you isolate it even more than just aperture and depth of field will allow you to do normally. You can then really isolate it against a moving background, and it can look absolutely beautiful. Speaking of movement, fluid head tripods. It will make your life so much easier if you're trying to do a pan shot on a regular tripod. Trying to get that nice, beautiful, smooth flow of movement across a scene, it's so much easier if you've got a fluid head tripod. So if you're a photographer like me, the tripod heads that we use, they're fine, but actually for that smooth movement, it's very difficult. Fluid head tripods have a nice long handle on them that actually allow you to move it very gently, very slowly, to be able to get really nice movements. So it might be worth investing one of them. The other option, you get things like the, I can't remember the name of them, I've got one, slider, apparently slider, that's the word I was looking for. You can get a slider which will allow you to get really nice sort of tracking shots along, so not just panning like that, but actually physically moving the camera across the shot, and that will allow you to get a really nice shot as well. It's not a necessity, it's a luxury. It's something that you can do very straightforwardly, either holding the camera, you just won't necessarily be able to get it quite as smooth. Also, don't do what I did and buy, well, you can buy a super cheap one. I bought a super cheap one, and I'm just aware of the limitations of what a super cheap one will do. They're fun to play with if they're super cheap, but if you're going to take it seriously, it's worth buying a more expensive one that will move automatically for you rather than you having to push it along the way, because unfortunately us pushing it will never be quite as smooth as a machine doing it for us. In terms of B-roll, I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday about how we get really smooth slow-mo B-roll. And the classic thing would be being able to set into 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second when we're shooting. We want something that's going to be able to slow it down and look really delicious. Some of the higher end cameras will film at 120 frames a second. Some very high end cameras will now do 60p for 4K filming. But even 60 frames per second for regular 1080p, regular high definition, looks great. You slow it down to 40% and play it back on a 24 frames per second timeline, and it will look beautiful. So it's worth filming some bits and pieces in 60 frames per second when you're shooting to be able to get that really nice, smooth, slow motion footage to play back into your video. And think about the movement that you're making. Sometimes if it's going to be quite an amazing movement that somebody else is doing, your movement can actually be very static. You can just stay still and allow them to move. Equally, if you want to do movements of a static object, the good news is that slow motion will actually make your movements look far smoother. So it's a really good way to be able to get nice panning shots, tracking shots of a static subject, because it will just smooth everything out and make everything look a little bit more creamy. And lastly, one of the things that is a real skill and probably deserves its own separate video is headshots for filming. So this is me filming myself, and I've just got it set up as camera on a tripod with a monitor, and I've got a microphone just here, and I've got a light just there. And this is a really good setup for doing talking heads. If you want to actually film somebody else talking, it's much easier if you're behind the camera filming somebody else rather than having to set it all up yourself. This is a fairly standard talking heads video where you've got relatively center framing. You could also choose to have it slightly off center. Often if you're doing that and you're having an interview, you'll also have them looking off camera. But have a play with it. Essentially it's like taking a portrait. So follow the same rules as you would for normal composition for a portrait and go from there. So that's about it. I hope that's been helpful. I hope that will give you a few new ideas for any filming, any videos that you want to go out and take in the next few days, next few weeks, and enjoy it. Remember, that's one of the key things. You've got to keep enjoying what you're doing. Enjoy playing with it, enjoy experimenting and seeing what you can create. This is part of a long-running video series. I say long-running, it's 20 videos that I'm releasing over the course of 2 weeks. So subscribe to stay up to date with everything that's been released so far. And thank you for watching.